Welcome to Strategy Execution Unlocked and the second episode in our series, The OGs of Strategy Execution. In this series, we meet with the pioneers who have helped shape the strategy execution discipline. This includes industry analysts, authors, founders of management consultancies, software products, as well as other industry practitioners. Today, I'm extremely excited to have Bill Dow join the show. Bill is recognized as a PMO guru. He's written a number of books on this critical function, as well as winning the coveted PMO of the Year award. Bill, welcome to the show. I guess the best way for me to start out here is you to give a more detailed intro in terms of your focus in your career in terms of strategy execution.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Ben. I really appreciate it. I appreciate being here. So as you said, I've done this for a while, right? So I think I'm like 35 years into this. First project was in 1991, so a long, long time ago. I've built PMOs in 4 different companies, 10 PMOs actually. I've written 7 books. And thanks for calling that out. But yeah, in 2023, I was the influencer, the PMO influencer of the world from PMO Global Alliance, which was awesome because PMI ended up building them. And so I was the last person that was actually recognized as that. So kind of a fun award. And I really appreciate it. But I really appreciate being here and absolutely love what you're doing and where you're going with this whole world that you're creating here. So thank you.
It's great to have you. So, I mean, we've talked about this offline. When I think about strategy execution, it's kind of the intersect of a number of roles, functions, and processes. I see the need to, integrate strategic portfolio management, business and enterprise architecture, any flavors of project management across the organization, as well as change management. But when you think about strategy execution from the vantage point that you've taken, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I love that question. And it's one where we really have to think about. So, again, my background's in the PMO and the project management space. So, we really have to think about when we think about strategy, we think about these big, global, lofty goals and where do we want to go and how do we want to change the world. But what happens is you have to take that down to actionable, you have to take that down to program and project execution. So when I think about PMOs and project management, I really think about that path. How do I take these big, lofty goals to change the world down to what programs, what projects, what portfolios are we going to run? And if you don't have that mapping, you're really going to struggle. So I love being involved in that strategy, but I also love being involved in because there's such an important part of the tactical execution. I think there's a mapping there that's so important.
Absolutely. So, when you think of how the PMO has evolved over the last 20 years that you've been doing this, what has changed? What are the challenges that you've seen organizations and other PMO members face?
Yeah, and one of the things that I think have changed is the role of the PMO has become more strategic. It has become more of a partner. We start thinking about how does this impact the PMO? So PMOs in the very early stages were about cranking out programs and projects, right? Let's get the project done. Let's do it in a repeatable way, but let's, time, cost, schedule type of thing, right? But what we've seen over the last 20 years is we've seen the PMO become a little bit more strategic. How does this impact the PMO? How do we get value? How do we get ROI? Right? Some of those buzzwords that have been around for a long time, we're starting to see the PMO drive some of those conversations. So in the 20 years, I've seen the PMO step up and really become more strategic and sitting at that strategy table, or at least them recognizing that there will be an impact to the PMO, which is a very big shift that we're seeing over the last several years in PMOs.
Now, obviously, it depends on the size of the organization, but often you're going to see what I term, rightly or wrongly, domain PMOs. PMOs that focus on a specific function of the business, whether it's IT or a specific portfolio or business unit. And then there's a lot of more talk nowadays about the enterprise function. I mean, the enterprise PMO, although it could go by many other names, the strategy execution office, right? But when you're thinking about that domain PMO, are you focused on the totality of the organizational strategy, or just the interpretation of that strategy as it sits with that function that you're representing?
And that's fundamentally the problem. You're 100% right. So when you think about an IT PMO or a marketing PMO or a services PMO, whatever the case may be, they're thinking strategy and how do I run the programs and projects to that strategy. And what happens is if you don't have that domain PMO, that enterprise PMO that's really looking across the organization, you're seeing some disconnects. You're saying, well, wait a second, they're running a project that looks very similar to this project, and we're wasting money across the board. So a domain or an enterprise PMO is really about putting a layer in place to understand that those tactical PMOs in marketing, in IT, and HR are actually rolling up to the strategy. So we often see that happening, and that's where good domain enterprise PMOs really have that organizational power or structure to say, no, we want to really understand what you're doing, and we want to look at this from a strategy perspective. Right? We often see that. We see the failures in that when they don't have the political clout or they don't have that culture in place to allow that to happen. Right? When we don't see good support of an enterprise PMO that can really oversee and or enhance what those domain PMOs are doing, we really see the structure and we see them doing whatever they want with no alignment to our strategy. And that's a huge problem.
Yeah, it's surprised me over the years how there seems to be a void at that enterprise level. Not every organization has an enterprise PMO, or I mean, it could go by many different names, right?
Yeah.
A strategy execution office, a transformation office, whatever, value management office, whatever it is. But it doesn't have that enterprise function that is looking to coordinate all activities across the organization relative to the strategy. Why do you think that is?
Well, and I think it's the size and the complexity of the company would need that, right? So a smaller, mid-sized company may just not need that, but something like a large software company in Redmond, for example, should probably have that, right? It's really going to depend on the business need, but I really do think it comes back to culture. Right? Like if the culture's not set up in a projectized environment, and they just believe like they did, years ago with, hey, just go crank these projects out, then you're not seeing that alignment. You're not seeing that need for the alignment. So there's a culture play here, but there's also a size and complexity and really, do we have the money to spend on building out an enterprise PMO and then individual PMOs? You're also going to see in a smaller company where they don't really have enterprise PMOs, they have project management decentralized, right? So a project management decentralized and a domain PMO is very different, right? It's a very different conversation, right? A domain PMO is going to have more structure and services and all the good things that make up a PMO. Decentralized project management in marketing or in HR is not a PMO. They may think it's a PMO, but it's really not a PMO. So I think there's a lot of complexity and a lot of makeup of businesses that really drive that need on whether they need that enterprise PMO or not. But I do think that we got to get to that enterprise PMO type of function so we can keep aligned to strategy. And I think we keep missing that. And I think we miss that, and people and organizations struggle in that because of that culture, because of that nature of, oh, just crank this project out. I don't care, how you do it. I just need this project. And we got to be thinking bigger. We got to be thinking value. We got to be thinking ROI. Why are we doing these projects?
I mean, one of the risks I've seen in terms of transitioning or bridging the gap from a domain PMO to an enterprise function. I call it enterprise function. I'm not necessarily in love with the term enterprise PMO because I think it carries the tactical connotations of a domain PMO unfairly to the enterprise level. what I think the dangers I've seen is exactly that, right? Let's say an IT PMO gets elevated because it's most likely the most structure of the PMOs within the different domains gets elevated to the enterprise level. But the leopard doesn't necessarily change its spots. It goes with portfolio management, but more of a focus on controls and project execution techniques than necessarily, really understanding the other disciplines or processes that are key to an enterprise function, which primarily is the alignment of all activities, both operational activity spend and discretionary activity spend, with strategy, but not necessarily responsible for how the minutiae of the execution may occur, which may occur differently in the different domain PMO.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's so true. I think, although on one hand too, a project is a project, right? So if you are an HR and you're executing a predictive project, if the IT PMO gets elevated and they give you the things to, the processes and templates and stuff to run that predictive project, there's a little bit of that, that commonality or that structure that should be applied. But you're right. Sometimes we often have this IT lens and we don't think about it from a marketing, from an HR, from a thing perspective, a sales perspective, which we really do need to think of. So there's a balance there, right? Not everyone can run an enterprise PMO, right? That takes a very different person with a huge background to look across, understand what's happening in those domains, understand the differences of those domains, and then adjust accordingly. So I think that's a key component to that as well. As we fire up these enterprise PMOs and we say, hey, we have to align to strategy, and then we just put a hot shot project manager in place to run that, and that just does not work. Right? That's a more scalable thing, and hotshot project managers are more deep than wide, right? And so we run into that a lot as well, and then they wonder why it doesn't work.
Yeah, and that's one of my arguments. And again, it doesn't necessarily matter, but to me, rebranding that enterprise function from an enterprise PMO to something else, I call it
Yeah,
strategy execution office, but there's many names for it, is important in the fact that I think unfairly that some of the PMOs carry that kind of tactical connotation, right? Because they've been focused on the execution, right? But as
yeah,
you move to the enterprise, and goes back to my definition of strategy execution, I think it's critical for that enterprise function, whatever name it's called, to be value focused, but also understand that they need to build a cohesive operating model. The minimum governance controls needed to align and manage all investments that is not just the discretionary projects or initiatives, whatever you want to call these things. It's also the operational activity and spend. And so that means that these guys need to have, an understanding, or at least to bring the domain expertise in around, at least business architecture, obviously portfolio management, program controls to straddle, different forms of execution that may be relevant for the different teams, as well as change management. And often see that there's, these different processes that are, as I just mentioned, that are controlled and by different teams and roles, sort of compete with one another versus, bringing them together seamlessly to build that operating model. But again, when I think about that strategy execution office, right, it's important to have a balance of, those domain expertise, right, to be able to control all investments, operational activity and spend, discretionary activity spend, with strategy, not
yeah,
just the discretionary project work. I mean, how do you see the role of,
yeah.
change management and architectures, I say architecture, business enterprise architecture, relative to the PMO, and how closely tied do these need to be, enterprise or domain? It doesn't necessarily matter.
Yeah, 100% tied. So we're starting to see organizational change management really blow up, right? We've got the ADKAR models, the ProSci models, the Cotter models. We've got several models out there, and I've written those in my books and stuff. And what I've seen is that's starting to blow up. That is starting to say, hey, we need to start recognizing the importance of change, and we need to start saying this is far more than just scope, schedule, budget. We got to understand adoption. We got to understand how we change the hearts and minds of people to adopt these products, or these projects, or the results of these projects to the organization. So we're seeing organizational change management blow up like it's never blown up before, which is amazing. And I think that's so critical. I think the architectural piece, I think that's becoming so important as well. And often see that's really done at the tactical project level, and we don't look across the board. We need to start bringing architecture, organizational change management. These got to be critical, cohesive things, a part of a PMO. And so when you talk about your strategy office and you talk about these key domains, I think they're critical. I think they're also game changing because, and I don't use that term lightly, I actually hate that term. But what I think you're doing is you're highlighting the need for this cross connection that is not out there. We're not seeing a lot of people talk like you are talking about, bringing these key groups together, making them a strategy office. So we're looking across the board. We're looking at value. We're looking at change management. We're looking at scope, schedule, budget. We're looking at architecture. We're looking, right? And so where do all of this align to moving the company forward? Moving the strategy of the company, right? That's where I think is really, a really great aspect of what you're looking at and can really change the dynamics of a company and moving a company forward if they start adopting these principles. So I think it's huge.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I always say is it takes a village to master strategy execution, right?
Yeah.
And I often see different functions trying to master change management, architecture, PMO, portfolio, whatever, right? Trying to strategic planning, trying to master their domains, their specific methodologies. And as I've said before, this kind of builds a fractured operating model, right? Where value seeps through the cracks, right? You're eroding value through that fractured operating model versus understanding that, it's the strategy execution is almost a Venn diagram where these processes and functions converge, right? And how do you, kind of eliminate the redundancies that exist and build a personalized operating model or governance framework for your organization, which is maybe leads to another question, right? What is your thoughts on, kind of methodologies versus specific methodologies? There's many out there, right? Whether it was PPM going into the agile transformation, which maybe do not fit each organization, like a one size fits all approach versus a personalized approach to governance. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, some of these methodologies have been around since the Stone Ages, right? Like this predictive methodology, this waterfall, if you would, from an IT perspective. But manufacturing and research and some of these step-by-step processes have been around for years. Agile is relatively new. It's about 25 years old. It's hit in some places. It hasn't hit in others. But I think what we're seeing is a blend. I see this hybrid or this water scrum or this waterfall, right? I see this happening more so in IT. But I think we have to think bigger than just IT, right? Manufacturing's not changing the way they're doing their predictive, right? Boeing's still creating the planes the same way they're creating them. Are they taking aspects of Agile and all the things that Agile brings from a big A and a little a perspective? Of course they are. You'd be crazy not to adapt some of these things. But the idea is that we have standard methodologies for a reason, because then sometimes they work. And I think we have to stay with those basic methodologies and then tweak to what is applicable to your company, right? I don't think one size fits all. It just can't, right? It just cannot specifically in IT. But you have to take all the goodness out of all these methodologies and say what works for us. What's that hybrid approach for us? And so I like that, but I think you're always coming down, especially in IT, you're coming down to those three: predictive, waterfall, agile, and a hybrid. But I think we have to think broader too, right? We have, from a strategy perspective, we have to think of all industries: construction, research, manufacturing, right? IT. We have to look across the board.
No, I definitely think you're right. Hear a lot about, and we talked a little bit about value and being more strategic. and the
Yeah.
PMO saying that we need a seat at the table. That's often been said, right? I mean,
Yeah.
go back to
Yeah.
2006. It was
Yeah.
IT needs a seat at the table to be a business partner. Now
Yeah.
I'm hearing the PMO needs a seat at the table. What's stopping them getting that seat at the table, or do you think they already have that seat?
No, I don't think they have it in all cases. Not at all. I think what's stopping it is it's a culture. It's really a culture perspective, right? It's to do we think about projects and the execution of projects being the thing that's going to change our strategy? Or, we often say, do this project and we get X, right? But are we a projectized organization that really devalues projects and programs and projects, or do we value them? And if we value them, then as they think strategy, they're going to bring the PMO up. They're going to bring the PMO to the seat of the table and say, what are your thoughts? What would that look like? How do we do that? If we just think that, hey, they're just programs and projects, just get them done, we don't care how they get done, they'll never get that seat at the table. So I think the executives, the culture of the organization, the background and experiences of the executives as well in the portfolio program management space will allow you to get that seat at the table. And where we've been, right, through the course of PMOs and through the course of project management, we see some of these folks like myself getting older and potentially getting to that seat at the table to be able to drive some of those conversations. So the older you get and the more experienced you are in this space, you get that opportunity to sit at that table sometimes and go, but wait, what about? Right. So so that comes with experience.
Yeah, and I think of the sort of two bookends of strategy execution. What I mean by that is there's the strategic clarity, the definition, communication, decomposition, socialization of strategy across the organization, right? We're setting metrics, and then
Yeah.
there's the
Yeah.
other bookend, which is the value realization, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I think, I mean, fundamentally, those are the two of the most important things, right? From my,
Yeah.
I'm interested
Yeah.
in your views, but from my
Yeah.
view, organizations are bad at both of those, right? So it's
Yeah.
difficult to be value centric if you're not able to successfully communicate strategy across the organization, and then there's some function sitting somewhere that's measuring value, but not that effectively, or not at all, right? So I kind of feel like uh, in terms of getting a seat at the table, whether you're invited or otherwise, executives have to understand that there is an issue which maybe resides with them in terms of how to clearly articulate strategy. So you're providing everyone with a North
Yeah.
Star. As you said, the bigger the
Yeah.
organization, right, the harder that is to decompose and socialize. And then, of course, establish the processes to track value, which is not easy, right? As long as I've been doing this,
No.
I haven't seen that done well. And again, as I said, it
Yeah.
often resides in a finance function or somewhere else, which is doing this
Yeah.
disconnected from the other processes or functions in strategy execution. So again, I may have answered the question, but what are your thoughts there in terms of the changes that need to come top down in an organization to make strategy
Yeah.
execution a reality?
Yeah, I'll start with your end of your bookend is that's that value. And you touched upon it briefly, and I think you're 100% right. Let's think about that for a second. If you're putting a large payroll system in and you're doing it for the payroll department, right? And it takes 3 to 5 years to get this value back based on laying people off, based on hundreds of, $50 million to put the thing in. Who's going to collect that value? You're going to ask the payroll department to collect that value because it's 3 to 5 years in, and the programs and the project managers are long gone off to many different things. So, what you're seeing is from that bookend perspective, do companies set up value management offices? Do they have people that are going to be around 3 to 5, 7 years to watch that payroll system's value come in place? They don't. right? Even the payroll department who wanted that new piece of software, they're too busy cranking out payroll than to worry about value. They just like, thank you. I don't care what it costs, but now I have a new payroll system, and we adjust and we go forward. So we have a fundamental disconnect across the industry on how do we set up value management offices for people's full-time jobs to be collecting value. Now, imagine if you put that in place and we could lay these people off, we could save these millions of dollars, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, and that company was responsible to make that happen. So, payroll system, we save millions of dollars, great. Where do we take those millions of dollars? We're taking those millions of dollars, whatever the case might be. It doesn't necessarily make sense in the PMO unless it's a service offering that you dedicate people to, and that's their full-time job. Now, if you're running 30, 40, 50 projects, of course you could set that up. Who's going to allow that to happen? Who's going to give the FTE dollars? Who's going to give that organization the dollars to collect that? That's the executive team. So if the executive team, so if the front of your bookshelf, if the executive team really strongly values value and collecting that value, they have to put the operational processes, procedures, organizational charts in place to collect that. So it has to start at the beginning to end up in a organization, a person, a set of people to collect value over a long period of time. And it's just not we're just not seeing that being put in place. So love where we're going with value, love the value conversation, but it's going to require companies stepping up and doing things differently. And that could be the strategy management office. That strategy management office could have a value component to it, right? And just have people collecting value.
Yeah, I was about to say the same, right? To me, we've talked about, the enterprise function. We've mentioned a value management office. We mentioned the change office. We mentioned, to me, it is an amalgamation of these things to set up the lean controls needed to be able to, define, communicate, measure, track value, right? And respond quickly as things change, right? I mean, that enterprise function does not need to know all the details in terms of every task, whatever flavor is being executed, but it needs to be able to understand, the impact on strategy. And I kind of feel a little bit like there's a void. I've talked about this before. There's in 2006 to 2012, I feel like, and I supported this as a consultant, as a developer of portfolio management software products, a professionalization of IT as IT tried to interpret the business strategy and deal with the capacity issues they always have had in terms of working on the right things. There was a professionalization both on the operational activity and spend of IT, as well as best use of the discretionary funds as well. I think there's that similar void in the 2020s at the enterprise level, where there is not that professionalization, even with or without an enterprise PMO that may or may not be bringing in the value side of things, may not be including the architecture side of things, the change side of things. Well, they're often doing the change side of things, but you know what I mean? So I feel that there needs that professionalization, and I feel like it starts with the executive team recognizing the fact that value is being eroded, right, from these critical investments, right?
Yeah.
Whether that is being lost outright, due to failure rates or challenge rates, or lost outright due to failure rates, or deferred, due to challenge rates, whether that is cost overruns or just delays in doing things, or whether that's value not even being identified in the front end, right, where you look at there's a natural misalignment of portfolios with strategy even before you start executing, where value is being left on the table. It surprised me a lot, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. Why I talk about developing the strategy execution muscle in the organization hasn't become a top 3-4 priority in an organization driven by the executive team, which would result in the creation of enterprise office. And I think it's because the executives either are ignoring the fact or not aware that value is being lost due to this poor or suboptimal capability, or maybe worse still, they're ignoring it, right? Or just see it as a cost of doing business, right? To do this, we're going to hemorrhage value on the way. I think it ties back a little bit to why the PMO or why the enterprise function doesn't have a seat at the table, right? What do you think is going to get the executive's attention to say, look, we've got to develop this capability like we do any major capability in the organization?
I think I think it comes down to pain, right? There's not enough pain for them to stop and pause and do it. And so, right, there's always this pain threshold, right? And so if pain gets bad enough, they will start doing that. Right? If we start cutting costs and we're looking for cost savings and we're looking for things like that, you're right, we're going to be in more of a mode where we need to start looking at this value and understand the value that's lost. So I think we've got executives that can or cannot do it, right? And may need consultants to come in to kind of help them guide them through the process. I think the pain's not great enough, right? We're not recognizing that, hey, we could save millions here with this project, or hundreds of dollars here, or get rid, or like just getting rid of processes that don't add value, right? Like, so I do think that there's a pain point, and it's not great enough for them to make a change. If it was great enough, they would make a change. And so I think there's
So
just that. And I also think, that there's just those couple different factors of why that's not happening.
So to force a change then is going to require a reactive act based on something bad happening versus a proactive capability improvement. Because so it goes back to what I'm saying. Then I think it's they see it as a natural cost of doing business, right? The value is going to be eroded, right? Okay, that makes sense.
So think about that for a sec, right? Because we often, when we talk about value, we talk about things that take 2 to 3 to 4 years to come, right? And actually take place, right? A $50 million payroll system. And what I think you're keying on here is, what about the things that could be realized quicker? Right? Why are we not taking the things that could actually be realized quicker and doing something with that? And I do think that it becomes more of a reactive. And if we proactively looked at the value that each of these projects are going to take and the time frame to which we hit these things, they could actually be driving a more proactive conversation, which is exactly where you want to get to. Right, reactive is never good. You want leading indicators, not lagging indicators, right? So you want to be able to drive proactively, getting the value out of these projects and doing something with that value, not reacting to it happen.
I think that's a very good point, and I want to do another episode focused on the leading indicators of business value erosion, right? Because waiting till the end to figure out you didn't achieve that value is not good, right? But I think there are a number of indicators that suggest, if they're not firing right on all cylinders, the value is being eroded, right? So you start plugging those gaps
through the life of the project, right?
Through the life of the project, and also the operational side as well, right? It's not, I mean, obviously when we look at the actual overall spend of an organization and how an organization executes, yes, the big bets on the projects, but also there's just the overall operating fabric of the business geared to executing, right? That needs to operate. So maybe last question then. So, where do you see things going over the next 3 to 5 years from a PMO perspective?
Yeah. And the natural answer will be AI, right? Everyone's going to say AI, AI, AI. I'm not going to say AI. I mean, of course AI is there, but we don't know what AI is going to do. What I'm seeing is data. I'm seeing analytics. I'm seeing, wow, let's start collecting these value statements. Let's start driving insights from the data that we have across all of our projects. ROI, value statements. Let's start driving leading conversations with data and with the analytics that we're seeing across our programs and our projects. Yes, AI is going to help us 100%. I totally get that. We don't know yet. We're still working through that. So that's one thing, data and analytics. And then, of course, benefits realization, right? And the value we just talked about. If I start storing benefit data and I start storing value data and I start changing the way we're delivering our projects through the life of the projects to continue to focus on value, that's going to be huge. If I start making project trade-off decisions based on value, that's big, right? If we go 10% or we go, a month longer and I get this much more value, that's huge. That's a culture shift that would really be tremendous. Projects should start executing. And then I see the tightening of, strategy and PMOs, more conversations between the two, not just dumping it onto the PMO to execute, really understanding what we're delivering, how it drives to strategy, and keeping that mapping. I think the tactical team members know when they know how what they're doing aligns to strategy, that's huge. And we've got to start adapting that.
That's great. Yeah, obviously AI is going to have an impact, but I think you're absolutely right. I think we've been sitting on a wealth of data as a PMO enterprise or otherwise, and interpreting that data and looking to improve those leading indicators based on what you're saying, right, will only help with the value realization story or ensuring value is not leaking, which I think in turn elevates the PMO to a value-centric function, even if it's still staying core to its ability to be able to optimize the tactical delivery, right, where a lot of these leading indicators sit, right? So,
and fundamentally, it will always come down to scope, schedule, budget, right? Like there's every executive in the world is going to say scope, schedule, budget. What we need the executives to start doing is end value. But what's the value? What kind of value can I get? Sure, here's $1 million more, but you get that much more value. Good, here, take it. That's a culture shift. And that's one we have to get to. If we're going to realize value, it's got to start and continue through the execution of projects.
Great. Well, Bill, listen, I don't want to take any more of your time. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Hope to have you on some other episodes where we dive into different topics as it relates to the PMO, enterprise or otherwise. No, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I really appreciate being here and appreciate being part of your series and this whole world that you're creating. I absolutely love it.
Cheers, Bill.